Blockbuster kids watched Ghostbusters. Gen X kids watched a punk western starring Joe Strummer, a body horror satire where the rich literally eat the poor, and a Transformers movie starring Orson Welles where Optimus Prime dies in the first act. These are the 80s movies nobody talks about. But if you remember any of them, you're not just old. You were there. This one's got James Caan and Mandy Patinkin as mismatched cop partners, but one of them is an alien. And not just any alien. Patinkin plays Sam Francisco, a member of a refugee alien race that crash-landed in the Mojave Desert and now lives among humans in a slightly dystopian version of 1991 Los Angeles. Caan is the grizzled old-school cop, suspicious of these so-called newcomers. Patinkin is the clean-cut, polite alien detective trying to blend in and do things by the book. Together, they investigate a murder case that takes them deep into the alien underclass, where there's drugs, sex, and a whole lot of corporate corruption. It's got the neon-lit aesthetic of Blade Runner, but with a buddy cop attitude, and it leans into the whole minority metaphor without getting too preachy. Kind of like if Lethal Weapon and District 9 had a weird bubblegum-colored baby. There was even a whole TV series spun off from this, but the movie's where it all started, and it's still the one worth revisiting. Straight to Hell is a punk rock spaghetti western with Joe Strummer playing a hitman on the run. That alone is already unhinged, but then you throw in Courtney Love, Elvis Costello, Dennis Hopper, Grace Jones, Jim Jarmusch, and the Pogues, all in the same film. And what you get is 90 minutes of glorious, chaotic nonsense. It was directed by Alex Cox, same guy who did Sid and Mancy, and you can tell, this movie is held together with duct tape and attitude. The script feels like it was written during a hangover, but that's kind of the charm. It's got absurdist subplots, janky sets, sudden outbursts of violence, and everyone looks like they raided the same thrift store and just ran with it. The tagline was a story of blood, money, guns, coffee, and sexual tension, and somehow it delivers on all of that. The runtime's short, the pacing's wild, and the cast is just magnetic, even when you have no clue what the hell's going on. It bombed when it came out, but today it's a cult relic. If you were alive in the late 80s, you probably remember how everywhere Jeff Goldblum and Gina Davis were. Earth Girls Are Easy might be the weirdest and most joyful thing they ever made together. Davis plays Valerie, a valley girl whose fiancé cheats on her, and just as she's figuring out what to do with her life, 3 furry aliens crash into her swimming pool. And those aliens, Jim Carrey, Damon Wayans, and Charles Rocket. Valerie gives them a full 80s makeover, and once they're shaved, they turn out to be dreamy guys with no clue how to act on Earth. So she teaches them everything they need to know: TV, fashion, how to hit the LA clubs. And from there, it becomes a synth-scored sex comedy with aliens. It's completely bonkers, totally fun, and way more self-aware than it gets credit for. Here's one of the best films of the decade that most people under 40 have never even heard of. Wim Wenders directed it, same guy who did Wings of Desire, and it's probably the quietest, loneliest road movie ever made. Harry Dean Stanton plays Travis, a man who's been missing in the desert for years. When the film starts, he's barely even speaking. And slowly, he comes back to life, tries to reconnect with his son, tries to find his estranged wife. And the whole thing plays out across these wide, open American landscapes that make everything feel bigger than life and completely hollow at the same time. This film didn't just inspire other movies, it inspired music. U2 cited it as an influence on the Joshua Tree. The bands Travis and Texas literally took their names from it. Kurt Cobain loved it, so did Elliott Smith. Society is what happens when you take 80s body horror, throw in Beverly Hills Elites, and then crank the satire up to 10. It's directed by Brian Yuzna, the guy behind Bride of Reanimator and Return of the Living Dead 3, and stars Billy Warlock as a kid who starts to realize his rich, perfect family might be hiding something. What he finds is one of the most twisted final acts in horror history. This movie builds like a paranoid thriller, but when it hits the finish line, it just melts into something completely deranged. The effects are from Screaming Mad George, the same guy who worked on Big Trouble in Little China, Predator, A Nightmare, on Elm Street 3. So yeah, it gets weird. Running scared is what happens when you give a buddy cop movie some actual personality. Billy Crystal and Gregory Hines play a pair of Chicago detectives who, after one too many close calls, decide they're done. They head down to Key West, fall in love with the easy life, and make a plan to retire and open a bar. Problem is, they've still got time left on the job, and one last case to deal with before they can clock out for good. This one doesn't try to reinvent the wheel. It's just really good at being what it is. There's great chemistry between the leads, plenty of shootouts and car chases, and a Michael McDonald soundtrack that will not leave your head for a week. Forget the Bayhem. This is the real Transformers movie. Yes, it was made to sell toys. Yes, it's technically a feature-length ad, but it's also got Orson Welles in his final performance. Leonard Nimoy, Eric Idle, Judd Nelson. This cast is stacked. But what makes this film so interesting is that it doesn't play it safe. It actually kills off major characters. Optimus Prime dies like 25 minutes in. Megatron gets turned into Galvatron. They went full space opera. The animation's wild, the soundtrack shreds, and there are actual sci-fi ideas buried in here that put the live-action movies to shame. If you missed this one in theaters, or just dismissed it as a dumb cartoon, it's worth another look. It hits harder than you'd expect. Now, back in the Cold War paranoia days, Hollywood gave us Red Dawn, a movie that basically asked, what if the Russians really did invade America? And the answer? Apparently they'd be stopped by a bunch of high school kids with hunting rifles, pistols, and bows and arrows. This thing stars Patrick Swayze, Charlie Sheen, Leah Thompson, Jennifer Grey, every teen heartthrob of the era, all going full guerrilla warfare in the Colorado backwoods. Directed by John Milius, who also co-wrote Apocalypse Now and was basically a walking NRA fever dream. He actually based the story on a real military invasion scenario. The pitch was high school kids versus the Soviet Army, and somehow MGM looked at that and said, yeah, we're in. Critics hated it, called it fascist, paranoid, reactionary, but teenage audiences loved it. It became a cult hit. Fox News later praised it as Second Amendment cinema, completely unironically. And fun fact, at the time, it topped the charts for most violent film ever made, with 134 acts of violence per hour. Steve Martin plays a brain surgeon who falls in love with a disembodied brain in a jar. And that's not a joke. That is literally the plot. It was written and directed by Carl Reiner, made right after Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid, and you can feel that energy, like the studio just handed them money and said, go be weird. And they went. Full slapstick, sci-fi satire, talking brains, and Kathleen Turner playing a femme fatale so outrageous she makes Sharon Stone in Basic Instinct look chill. It's not quite The Jerk, but it's still classic Steve Martin, just completely off the rails. Now this one's beloved now, but when it first came out, it nearly tanked the Coen brothers' whole career. It was their second film after Blood Simple, which was all dark and noir and serious. And instead of staying in that lane, they went full cartoon mode with Raising Arizona, baby napping comedy, Nicolas Cage with a pompadour, Holly Hunter with a shotgun, and a demon biker flying across the desert chasing diapers. Fox had no idea what to do with it. The marketing was a mess. The movie barely made anything in its first few weeks. Roger Ebert said it didn't work. The New York Times called it pointless. Then VHS hit, and suddenly everyone was watching it. It turned into one of the most quoted comedies of the decade.